My name is Samantha Hayes, and for almost 3 years, I believed I mattered to someone who was actually building an entire future behind my back. Looking at it now, I can see every warning sign clearly. The late-night messages, the disappearing acts, the way he never fully let me into his life. But when you care about someone deeply enough, your brain becomes very good at turning red flags into excuses. And that's exactly what I did with Ethan Cole. If you met him casually, you'd probably think he was charming. Calm voice, confident smile, always knowing exactly what to say. He had this way of making every conversation feel personal, like you were the only person in the room who truly understood him. That was his real talent. Not honesty, not loyalty, manipulation. I met him when I was 23. At the time, I was working long hours, trying to build a stable life for myself after finishing college, and emotionally, I was in a place where attention felt meaningful. Ethan came into my life slowly. At first, it was harmless. Conversations, after work, random late-night texts, small compliments that felt bigger than they actually were because of the way he delivered them. He always sounded sincere. That's what made it dangerous. Within months, he became part of my routine. Every morning there was a message. Every night there was a conversation. Some days he'd disappear for hours, sometimes even an entire day. But then he'd come back with some emotional explanation about stress, work, family problems, mental exhaustion. And somehow, every single time, I believed him. That's the thing about emotional manipulation. It doesn't start with cruelty. It starts with comfort. Ethan constantly told me I was special to him. He said I understood him better than anyone else ever had. He told me he didn't trust people easily, but trusted me. And whenever I questioned where we stood, he'd say things that kept me emotionally attached without actually committing to anything real. You know what we are. I don't need labels to care about someone. You're the only person I talk to like this. Back then, those words felt intimate. Now they just sound rehearsed. The strangest part is that despite how emotionally intense everything felt, he never actually treated me like someone he respected publicly. We never went on proper dates, not once. No dinners, no photos together, no meeting friends. Everything existed in this weird, private bubble where I was emotionally available to him while he remained carefully hidden from me. But I ignored it, because every time I started pulling away, he'd pull me back in. Sometimes with affection, sometimes with vulnerability, sometimes with just enough attention to make me doubt my instincts. And I hate admitting this now, but it worked. For nearly 3 years. The first real crack happened one night when I noticed something small. Something stupid, honestly. He posted a photo online from a restaurant he claimed he never went to because he hated crowded places. In the reflection behind him, there was a woman sitting across the table. You couldn't fully see her face, but you could see enough to know she wasn't random. When I asked him about it casually, he laughed immediately. Oh, that's Claire. She's basically family. Basically family. That phrase stayed in my head longer than it should have, because people don't smile like that at basically family. After that, I started noticing things I had ignored before. He disappeared almost every weekend. Holidays were always busy family time. He never answered calls late at night, and every time I tried to get clarity about us, he'd somehow flip the conversation around until I felt guilty for even asking. That's when I realized something that honestly embarrassed me. I didn't actually know this man. Not really. I only knew the version he allowed me to see. And once that realization hits you, you start questioning everything. I wish I could say I handled it maturely right away. I wish I could say I walked away with dignity. The second I felt suspicious, but the truth is I became obsessed with finding answers. Not because I wanted drama, but because deep down I already knew something wasn't right. I just needed proof, so I started paying attention. Little things first. social media patterns, tagged locations, mutual followers. Then deeper things, old comments, archived. Photos, friends lists, public records. And the more I looked, the worse it got. Because Claire wasn't basically family. Claire was his girlfriend, not casually either. Serious girlfriend. The kind of serious where families knew each other. The kind of serious where future plans already existed. And suddenly, every missing piece made sense all at once. Why I was hidden. Why I never got real dates. Why everything happened privately. Why he only contacted me when it benefited him emotionally or physically. I wasn't his future. I was his secret, and the moment, I fully understood that. Something inside me changed completely. Not heartbreak, not sadness, humiliation. Because while I was sitting there believing his words for years, this man had been building an entirely different life with someone else. And the worst part? He thought I would never find out. After I discovered Claire wasn't just some family friend, I couldn't stop looking. I told myself I only needed confirmation. Just enough proof to know I wasn't imagining things. But once you realize someone has been lying to you for years, your brain starts replaying every conversation differently. Every memory changes shape. Things that once felt romantic suddenly look calculated, and Ethan was very calculated. The deeper I dug, the more obvious it became that he had carefully separated his life into compartments. There was the public version of him, the polished, dependable guy everyone respected. Then there was the private version I knew, the late-night texter, the emotionally needy man who acted like I was the only person keeping him together. He switched between those versions so smoothly that I don't even think he saw himself as dishonest anymore. That realization messed with me more than the cheating itself. Because cheating is terrible, but manipulation over years? That changes. The way you trust your own judgment, I started checking timelines obsessively. At first, I felt guilty doing it, like I was invading someone's privacy. But every new thing I uncovered made that guilt disappear a little more. Claire's social media was mostly private, but enough was visible to paint a picture. Vacation photos, family dinners, birthday posts, inside jokes and comments. She wasn't just his girlfriend, she was his real life, and I was the hidden part tucked away in the shadows where nobody important could see me. The worst moment came late one night when I found an old photo from one of his cousin's accounts. It showed Ethan and Claire standing together at some engagement party for another couple. She had her hand on his chest, smiling at him like she completely trusted him. And what hit me hardest wasn't even the picture itself. It was the comments, underneath. People saying things like, "You two are next. Can't wait for your wedding. Perfect couple." My stomach dropped so hard I actually had to sit down. Wedding. They were talking about marriage while this man was still texting me almost every night, telling me I mattered to him more than anyone else. That's when I realized just how fake everything between us had been. Not partially fake, entirely fake. And suddenly all the little humiliations started replaying in my head at once. Every canceled plan, every time he disappeared for holidays, every excuse, every vague promise about timing and complicated situations. He had never been confused, never emotionally unavailable, never overwhelmed. He was simply already committed to someone else, and somehow still wanted access to me whenever it suited him. I stopped sleeping properly after that. My brain felt constantly loud. I'd go to work exhausted, come home emotionally drained, and then spend hours staring at old conversations trying to understand how someone could lie that naturally for so long. What scared me most was how believable he had sounded every single time. There were messages where he called me the only person who gets me. Messages where he said he felt emotionally trapped in life except when talking to me. Messages where he hinted about future possibilities without ever actually saying anything concrete. Looking back, he was careful with wording. Extremely careful. Just enough to keep me emotionally attached, never enough to be accountable. That's professional-level manipulation. And the sickest part? I don't think he expected consequences because he genuinely believed he could talk his way out of anything. For a few days, I seriously considered disappearing quietly. Blocking him, moving on, pretending none of it ever happened. A part of me wanted peace more than revenge. But every time I thought about staying silent, I pictured Claire smiling in those photos without knowing who she was actually dating, and I couldn't do it, because if our positions were reversed, I would want someone to tell me. Still, contacting her terrified me. Not because I thought I was wrong, because I knew how these situations usually go. The girlfriend blames the other woman. The guy lies convincingly. Everyone turns against the person exposing the truth. And honestly, Ethan was charismatic enough to pull that off. So before reaching out, I decided I needed undeniable proof. Not emotional claims, not vague accusations. Actual evidence that couldn't be twisted around later. That's when I started organizing everything. Screenshots, call logs, voice messages, photos, dates, conversations. I created folders like I was building a legal case instead of exposing a liar. And the more organized it became, the more horrifying the full picture looked. Because when you compress years of manipulation into evidence folders, patterns become impossible to ignore. He contacted me mostly late at night. He disappeared during important holidays. He avoided public spaces. He never introduced me to anyone significant. And yet, emotionally, he constantly reinforced the idea that I mattered deeply to him. It was intentional, every bit of it. One message in particular stayed burned into my memory. He had written, "I don't know what I'd do without you." At the time, I remember rereading it over and over because it made me feel important. Now it just made me angry. Because while sending that message, he was probably sitting next to the woman he planned to marry. That realization killed something inside me permanently. After nearly a week of obsessing over everything, I finally found Claire's contact information through social media. I stared at the message box for almost an hour before typing anything. My hands were shaking so badly I kept making spelling mistakes. I didn't know how to even begin telling someone their entire relationship might be built on lies. Eventually, I kept it simple. I introduced myself. I apologized in advance. Then I told her there were things she deserved to know about Ethan. I expected anger immediately, or denial, or being blocked. Instead, she replied within 20 minutes, and her response completely caught me off guard. She said, "I think I already know what this is about." The second I read that message, my entire body went cold. Because that meant one thing: this wasn't the first time. The moment Claire replied, I realized this situation was much bigger than I originally thought. Her message wasn't emotional or confused. It sounded tired, like someone already carrying suspicions they were afraid to confirm. That honestly made me feel worse for her immediately. Because one thing became very clear in that moment. Ethan hadn't just lied to me. He had probably been lying to everyone around him for years. I asked if she wanted proof, and she replied almost instantly, yes, just one word. No anger, no accusations, just certainty. I remember staring at my screen for several seconds before sending the first screenshots. I chose the obvious ones first, messages where Ethan clearly crossed boundaries no committed man should ever cross. Messages where he told me I was the only woman he cared about emotionally. Messages where he talked about our connection like it meant something rare and special. Claire stopped replying for almost 10 minutes after I sent them. Then finally another message appeared. How long has this been going on? That question hit harder than I expected. Because suddenly this wasn't about exposing him anymore. It was two women trying to understand how much of their lives had been manipulated by the same person. I told her the truth. Almost 3 years. After that, everything exploded. Not publicly, privately. Claire started sending me her own screenshots, and honestly, those messages hurt in a completely different way. While Ethan was telling me I was the only one who understood him, he was sending her paragraphs about building a future together. Talking about houses, trips, marriage plans, family plans. He had entire conversations about engagement rings while still keeping me emotionally attached on the side. I actually felt sick reading it. Because I realized something humiliating. I wasn't even competition. I was convenience. A hidden emotional backup he used whenever he wanted validation, attention, or control. Meanwhile, Claire was the person getting the real version of his public life. At least that's what I thought initially. But the more Claire and I talked, the more obvious it became that Ethan manipulated both of us differently. He gave her stability while feeding me emotional intensity. Different tactics for different people. And somehow, he managed to maintain both realities without collapsing under the pressure of his own lies. That takes a terrifying level of dishonesty. One point, Claire asked if we had ever gone on dates together. When I told her no, she got quiet again. Then she admitted Ethan always accused her of being too jealous whenever she questioned female names in his phone. He constantly made her feel irrational for doubting him. Classic manipulation. Make. People question themselves so they stop questioning you. The conversation between us lasted nearly 5 hours that first night. 5 straight hours of comparing timelines, screenshots, stories, and inconsistencies. And with every new detail, Ethan looked worse. Not messy, not confused, calculated. There were overlaps that made my stomach turn. Nights, he told Claire. He was working late while talking to me for hours, trips he claimed were business-related that were actually vacations with her, moments where he emotionally comforted me after bad days while simultaneously planning anniversaries with another woman. Some point, the sadness disappeared and was replaced entirely by anger. Not explosive anger. Cold anger. The dangerous kind that forms when humiliation finally turns into clarity. Claire eventually admitted she had suspected something before. Apparently there had been another woman years earlier, though Ethan convinced her it was harmless emotional confusion caused by stress. He always had explanations ready. Always knew exactly how to reposition himself as misunderstood instead of guilty. But this time the evidence was too much. There was no way around it anymore. Voice messages, screenshots, photos, call histories, even messages where he slipped up and contradicted himself between us. He was done. Around 2 a.m, Claire sent me one final message before going offline. I'm confronting him tomorrow. I barely slept that night. Part of me felt relieved. Another part felt terrified. Not for him, for myself. Because once someone like Ethan loses control of a narrative, they don't usually react calmly. Men like that survive on image, on perception, on being admired, and I had just helped destroy the version of himself he spent years building. The next afternoon, Claire called me unexpectedly. The second I answered, I could hear it in her breathing. Something huge had happened. She told me Ethan denied everything initially, exactly like we expected. He claimed I was obsessed, said I was emotionally unstable, said I misunderstood their connection. But then she showed him the screenshots, the voice messages, the timelines. And according to Claire, his entire face changed. Not sadness, not guilt, fear, real fear. Because for the first time, he realized talking, wasn't going to save him. Claire said he started panicking almost immediately. First, he tried minimizing everything, then blaming stress, then blaming me, then claiming he never meant for things to go this far. Apparently, he even cried at one point. Cried, after lying for years. I should have felt satisfied hearing that, but honestly, I just felt empty, because nothing he said mattered anymore. Claire eventually told him to leave her apartment and blocked him everywhere after he refused to fully take accountability. She sounded devastated, but also strangely calm, like someone who had finally stopped doubting their instincts. Before hanging up, she thanked me. That part stayed with me the most because I had spent days terrified she would hate me. Instead, she said, "You gave me my reality back." I cried after that call ended, not because I missed Ethan, because I finally understood how deeply manipulation can damage your sense of reality. For weeks after everything blew up, Ethan disappeared completely. No calls, no messages, nothing. Mutual. Acquaintances hinted his relationship collapsed publicly and that his friend group found out pieces of what happened too. Apparently, he became obsessed with controlling the narrative before it spread further. And honestly, I moved on. Eventually, I stopped thinking about him entirely. Life became peaceful again until recently, because apparently Ethan still wasn't finished, trying to protect his image. And the things I started hearing about myself made me realize he still hadn't learned a single thing. For a long time after everything ended, I genuinely believed that chapter of my life was over. Ethan disappeared, Claire disappeared, and honestly, that was exactly what I wanted. No drama, no revenge fantasies anymore, no obsessive late night thinking. I focused on rebuilding myself instead, and rebuilding yourself after emotional manipulation is harder than people think. You don't just lose trust in the other person, you lose trust in your own judgment. For months, I questioned everything about myself. How did I ignore the signs for so long? Why did I accept so little while convincing myself it meant something? Why did I let someone emotionally control my self-worth without even realizing it? Those questions stayed with me longer than Ethan did. But eventually, life became normal again. I changed jobs, made new friends, started therapy. Slowly, the version of me that existed during those 3 years faded away. Looking back now, I barely recognize that girl anymore. She was constantly anxious, constantly waiting for texts, constantly trying to earn emotional consistency from someone who never planned to give it. The newer version of me felt calmer, stronger, less, desperate for validation, and most importantly, free. That's why what happened recently caught me so off guard. It started with something small. A mutual acquaintance messaged me one evening asking if I was okay. At first, I thought maybe something serious had happened to someone we both knew. But then she asked a strange question. "Why is Ethan suddenly talking about you again?" My stomach dropped immediately. Because when someone says again like that, it usually means conversations have already been happening behind your back for a while. I tried acting casual and asked what she meant. There was a pause before she finally admitted Ethan had apparently been telling people a completely different version of our situation. According to him, I had been obsessed with him for years. He claimed I emotionally manipulated him, harassed his relationship, and fabricated things to destroy his life because I couldn't handle rejection. I actually laughed when I first heard it, not because it was funny, because it was pathetic after everything he did, after all the lies, all the manipulation, all the emotional damage. This man was still trying to rewrite reality instead of taking accountability. But then I heard the worst part. Apparently, he wasn't just defending himself privately. He was spreading humiliating rumors about me specifically designed to destroy my credibility. He told people I was unstable, desperate, attention-seeking, that I invented most of our relationship in my head, that I trapped myself emotionally. And somehow, hearing that years later hurt differently than the cheating itself, because cheating ends eventually, but humiliation lingers, especially when someone keeps trying to preserve their image by destroying yours. At first, I wanted to ignore it completely. Honestly, I almost did. I had already exposed him once. I had already moved on. The healthy thing would have been to stay silent and keep living my life. But there was one problem. The rumors were spreading. Slowly, quietly. Exactly the way manipulative people prefer. Not dramatic enough to get caught directly. Just enough poison dropped into conversations to shape how people saw me. And the more I thought about it, the angrier I became. Because Ethan still believed he could control the narrative. Still believed women would stay quiet while he cleaned up his reputation at their expense. Still believed charm could erase evidence. That realization changed something in me all over again. One night I ended up rereading our old messages for the first time in years, not because I missed him, because I needed to remind myself I hadn't imagined everything. Trauma does that sometimes. Enough gaslighting can make even obvious truths feel blurry over time, but the messages were still there. Crystal clear, the manipulation, the lies, the emotional dependency, everything. And suddenly I realized something important. Still had all the proof, every screenshot, every voice message, every timeline, everything that destroyed his lies the first time. And if he wanted to restart this story years later, then maybe I needed to remind people exactly who he really was. Not emotionally. Factually. The final straw happened during dinner with a friend when Ethan's name came up unexpectedly. She looked uncomfortable before finally admitting she almost didn't trust me when we first met because of things she'd heard about me through mutual connections. That hit me harder than anything else. Because suddenly, his rumors weren't abstract anymore. They were affecting real relationships, real perceptions, real opportunities. And meanwhile, he got to walk around pretending he was some misunderstood victim while I carried damage I didn't deserve. I went home furious that night. Not loud fury, focused fury, the kind where your brain becomes terrifyingly calm. I opened an old external hard drive where I had stored everything years earlier. For almost an hour, I just sat there staring at the folders. Proof of conversations, photos, audio clips, dates, evidence so overwhelming it made his current lies look ridiculous. And that's when the idea started forming. Again, not revenge exactly. Correction. Because Ethan's biggest weapon was distance from the truth. Time had passed. Memories had faded. People only knew fragments of the story now, which gave him space to reshape it however he wanted. But what happens when the original receipts suddenly reappear? What happens when the version he worked so hard to bury comes back publicly? That thought stayed in my head all night, and by morning, I had already decided what I was going to do. The difference between the first time I exposed Ethan and now was simple. Back then, I was heartbroken. This time I was calm, and honestly, calm people are far more dangerous than emotional ones because they stop reacting impulsively. They start thinking strategically. Every decision becomes intentional. Every move has purpose. And after hearing how long Ethan had been quietly destroying my reputation behind my back, I realized something very clearly. If I stayed silent again, he would keep doing it, not just to me, probably to other women too. That thought bothered me more than the rumors themselves, because manipulative people survive through silence. Every person who quietly walks away becomes another erased witness. Another version of events they can rewrite later. And Ethan had clearly spent years perfecting that system. I wasn't going to help him maintain it anymore. I spent 2 straight days organizing everything carefully. Not emotionally, not dramatically. I treated it almost like preparing a presentation. The goal wasn't chaos. The goal was clarity. I reviewed hundreds of old screenshots, narrowing them down to the most undeniable ones. Messages where he explicitly called me the only woman he cared about emotionally. Messages sent while he was publicly in a relationship with Claire. Voice notes filled with intimacy he later claimed never existed. Timelines proving overlap. Even moments where he contradicted stories he had told other people. The evidence spoke for itself, and that's what made it powerful. I didn't need exaggeration. Truth was enough. At one point, I considered contacting Ethan privately first. A small part of me wondered if giving him one final chance to stop spreading lies would be the mature thing to do. But then I remembered something important. He already had chances. Hundreds of them. Every lie was a choice. Every rumor was a choice. Every attempt to humiliate me years later was a choice. So no. He didn't deserve another warning. The actual post took me hours to write because I wanted every sentence to stay controlled. I refused to sound bitter or unstable because that would only feed into the image he was trying to create about me. Instead, I focused on facts, simple, direct, clean. I explained that years ago I had been involved with someone who lied extensively about his relationship status. I explained that I discovered the truth, contacted the girlfriend with evidence, and stepped away from the situation entirely afterward. Then I addressed the rumors directly. I wrote that hearing false stories about myself years later forced me to defend my own name. And finally, I included proof. Not everything, just enough. Screenshots, dates, a few voice message transcripts, enough to completely destroy the narrative he had been spreading. Before posting it, I stared at the screen for almost 20 minutes, because once something goes public, there's no taking it back. And despite everything, part of me still hated conflict. But then I remembered all the nights I questioned my sanity because of him, all the humiliation, all the anxiety, all the damage to my self-worth. And most importantly, the fact that he was still trying to paint me as crazy years later just to protect his image. That anger finally outweighed the fear. So I posted it. And within 30 minutes, everything exploded. The first reactions came from mutual acquaintances, shock mostly, then confusion. Then more people started recognizing details and timelines. People Ethan clearly assumed would never compare stories suddenly started talking to each other all at once. That's the dangerous thing about lies. Once one crack appears, the entire structure collapses fast. My phone started vibrating nonstop. Messages flooded in faster than I could read them. Some people apologized immediately for believing rumors about me. Others admitted Ethan had told completely different versions of the story depending on who he was talking to, and then came the messages that shocked me most. Women. Several women. Women I had never spoken to before. Apparently, I wasn't the only one. Not even close. One girl said Ethan flirted heavily with her while still publicly dating Claire. Another admitted he emotionally led her on for months before disappearing suddenly. A third woman sent me screenshots from years ago that sounded almost identical to messages he used on me. Same compliments, same emotional language, same manipulation. It was like discovering a script, and suddenly the situation became bigger than personal revenge. This wasn't one messy relationship. This was a pattern, a very practiced pattern. By nighttime, Ethan's name was circulating heavily through mutual social circles. People were reposting screenshots, comparing stories, asking questions publicly. The carefully managed image he spent years protecting started falling apart in real time, and according to one mutual friend, he was panicking. Apparently, Ethan started calling people nonstop, trying to contain the situation. First, he claimed the screenshots were edited. Then he claimed I was obsessed. Then he claimed everyone was taking things out of context. But the problem with manipulation is that once too many people compare experiences, patterns become impossible to deny, especially when receipts exist. The funniest part? He still refused to fully apologize. Even while getting exposed publicly, he focused more on protecting his reputation than acknowledging what he actually did. That told me everything. A few days later, I heard Claire finally left him permanently, after more women came forward. Apparently, she had tried rebuilding trust after the first exposure years ago, but seeing the newer evidence and realizing the behavior never stopped, ended whatever remained between them. When I heard that, I didn't feel victorious, just tired, because at some point you realize people like Ethan create destruction everywhere they go. They leave confusion behind them, self-doubt, insecurity, broken trust. And the saddest part is they usually blame everyone except themselves. But this time, he couldn't rewrite the story anymore, because too many people finally saw the real version of him all at once. And once that happens, charm stops working. After everything went public, I expected to feel satisfied. I expected relief, maybe even victory. But honestly, what I mostly felt was exhaustion. Because exposing someone after years of manipulation doesn't magically erase what they did to you. It doesn't suddenly restore the confidence they slowly damaged. It doesn't give you back the years you spent questioning your worth while they quietly benefited from your trust. If anything, the entire situation forced me to relive emotions I thought I had already buried. The humiliation, the confusion, the anger, the embarrassment of realizing how thoroughly someone lied to your face for years while acting completely normal about it. And yet, despite all of that, something important finally changed after the second exposure. People stopped, looking at me like I was the problem. For years, Ethan controlled the story because he spoke first. That's how people like him survive. They move quickly, shape perceptions early, and rely on the other person staying quiet out of shame or exhaustion. And honestly, it almost worked, permanently. If I had stayed silent one more time, his version probably would have become the truth. That realization stayed with me for weeks afterward. The internet eventually moved on, like it always does. The screenshots stopped circulating. People found newer drama to focus on. But inside our social circles, the damage to Ethan's image didn't disappear so easily. Apparently, more stories surfaced privately after my post. More inconsistencies. More women comparing experiences. And once patterns become visible, they're impossible to unsee. One mutual friend told me Ethan became extremely isolated afterward. A lot of people stopped trusting him. Others distanced themselves quietly because they realized how many different realities he had been maintaining at the same time. Apparently, he blamed everyone except himself. Again. At one point, I heard he called me vindictive for exposing him publicly. And honestly, hearing that almost made me laugh, because accountability always feels like cruelty to people who never expected consequences. But despite everything, I never responded again. I didn't need to. That's the thing about truth once. It fully comes out. Eventually it speaks for itself. A few months later, something unexpected happened. One of the women who contacted me after my post asked if we could meet for coffee. At first, I almost said no because I was emotionally tired of the entire situation. But something about her message felt genuine, so I agreed. We talked for nearly 3 hours, and during that conversation, I realized how common this kind of manipulation actually is. Different details, different personalities, same patterns, emotional dependency, inconsistency, private intensity mixed with public distance, future faking, gaslighting, making women feel special while carefully avoiding accountability. Listening to her felt surreal because parts of her story sounded almost identical to mine. At one point, she even laughed bitterly and said, "He really reused the same script on all of us." That sentence stayed in my head for days, because she was right. Ethan's biggest skill wasn't lying, it was personalization. He made every woman feel uniquely understood while giving all of us variations of the same manipulation. And once I understood that fully, something inside me finally let go. Not because he deserved forgiveness, but because I stopped taking his behavior personally. Manipulators don't destroy people because their victims are weak. They do it because they study emotional needs carefully and exploit them strategically. Understanding that changed the way I saw myself completely. For years, I blamed myself for believing him. Now I realize trusting someone isn't stupidity. Abusing that trust is. That difference matters. A lot. Sometimes people ask if I regret exposing him publicly. And honestly, no, not anymore. For a while I struggled with guilt because women are constantly taught to stay quiet, stay graceful, avoid conflict, avoid drama. We're taught that protecting our peace means silently walking away no matter what someone did to us. But silence only protects manipulative people. That's the truth nobody likes admitting. And if I had stayed silent, Ethan would still be out there telling people I was crazy while presenting himself as the victim. He would still be shaping reality however he wanted because nobody challenged him publicly. Instead, people saw the truth. Not my emotions, not revenge, evidence. And evidence changes everything. The strangest part is that after all the chaos, my life became quieter than ever. Healthier, too. I stopped craving validation from emotionally unavailable people. I stopped confusing inconsistency with passion. I stopped romanticizing emotional struggle as proof of love. Real love doesn't leave you anxious all the time. Real love doesn't hide you. Real love doesn't require detective work. And once you finally experience honesty after manipulation, you realize how exhausting fake love actually was. Looking back now, I don't hate Ethan anymore. I honestly just see him as someone deeply empty. Someone so obsessed with maintaining image and control that he sacrificed real relationships for temporary validation. And eventually, people like that trap themselves inside their own lies. That becomes their punishment. Not exposure, not embarrassment. Isolation. Because eventually nobody knows which version of them is real anymore. Not even themselves. And maybe the biggest lesson in all of this is something I wish I understood years earlier. When someone constantly makes you question your instincts, trust the instincts. Because deep down, your body usually notices the truth long before your heart is ready to accept it. So if you're listening to this right now and someone in your life keeps giving you mixed signals, hiding parts of themselves, making you feel confused more than secure, please don't ignore that feeling. Confusion is not love, and being chosen secretly is not the same as being valued openly. I learned that the hard way, but at least now, the truth belongs to me again. And no matter what Ethan says about me after this, people finally know who the liar really was.